Hey, welcome back. I just took about a 2 hour break and I did all of my math homework and my chemistry homework, and I also had to do my literature stuff, which I enjoyed tremendously. So actually, I didn't do any of those things. I just started up again. But anyhow, I'd like to start off again, and we'll finish up challenge one. Now, remember, you have to do challenge one yourself. So just don't say, well, Mr. Williams did challenge one, so I don't have to do it. Yeah, you got to do challenge one yourself. So let's go through and look at challenge one, some more challenge one. I have the splash, the intro page to 3D Experience. And again, I just log in, see if that happens. I really want to find out my stuff, so I go up over here and I click that little arrow or the little triangle. Got it there. This is me, and I want to pick up X design because I want to finish up that design. Because remember, the design, the wheels would fall off and the axle will fall off if I tried that design. Before we selected a new component, but we already have the component, so I'm going to open it, the component, and so, oh dear, I got 913 results. Okay, remember those 912 results before? That's because I added my design in there. So let's get rid of that stuff, and we remember what we're going to do is we're going to look at those tags. So let's get the tags open. And so these tags, I'm going to look at my stuff because I'm narcissistic, and I'm going to run down here, and I'm going to look in my collaborative space. And before we use the FTC parts library, but my stuff's not in the FTC parts library. It's in my personal space. So I'm going to click on my personal space. And here's a bunch of stuff from my personal space, which are all kinds of stuff I've been designing. So here's my famous doorstop. Okay, so we run through here and see this thing that's called Challenge 1 CSW. And so I click on that and I open it. Okay, and again, that's all by clicking on the left button of your mouse. So I'm bringing it in, and hopefully it's where we left off. And remember, we saved it. That's why we were able to do this. And there it is, where we left off. So this is exactly what we were doing before. So the problem is that we want to keep let me tip this up a little bit. We want to keep the wheels away from the motor. So let's do this. I just clicked on a wheel and with the left, and then I'm dragging it down. Okay, I don't want the wheels rubbing against the motors. Certainly I don't want the wheels inside the motor. So I need to space them out a little bit. So we'll do that. Okay, and then the other thing is I got to keep the wheels from falling off. And so we're going to use, and to do that, we'll use something called a collar. To keep them away from the motor, we do something called a spacer. Okay, so this is what we're going to add. We're going to add a couple of collars and a couple of spacers. Let's do the spacers first. And the way we do that is we have to go down to assembly, right? We can't really do what we want to do in sketch. We have to go to assembly. So right here, let's hit assembly. And then we will go through and we will see if we can pick up any spacers. Hopefully I put some spacers in our space. Get it? Spacers in our space. Okay, it's me. I'm going to run down here, and this time I'm going to pick up the parts library. And I'm going to run down, since it's alphabetized, I'm going to look at spacers. There are two spacers, okay? Let's see. This spacer is 3 millimeters, so it's a little guy. And this spacer is 15 millimeters, 5 times bigger. We could use either one. I think this small one works just fine because it keeps the wheels away from the motor. So we do the right kick, or the left click on that. We do the left click on that. We do OK. And then we should be bringing a spacer in. Okay, so, oh, hold it. Where's the spacer? Well, let's take a look at it. I know the spacer's there because I see it here. And then when I hover over spacer, I know the spacer is inside the motor. Okay, so I can't really see it. Okay, so what I'd like to do is I'd like to find that spacer. So I'm going to go forward, and then I'm going to, here's some axes, and here's some axes. Let me do the spacer again. Okay, and I clicked on the spacer this time. When I clicked on a spacer, a funny thing happened. Let me move it up a little bit. Do you see these arrows? I got an arrow here, I have an arrow here, and I have an arrow here. Don't worry about the arcs right now, okay? Just these three arrows. I can now move the spacer by grabbing hold of one of these arrows, and so I will click on this arrow, I will hold it down, and I will bring it up. And guess what it does? It moved the part for me, and in this case it moved at 24.19 millimeters. So I can then just click out over here, anywhere over here, and now this part's where it wants to be. So that's cool. Okay, so now I click on so now I need to do some mates. Remember this, if I hold on here, if I move it off, it's really not on it's not on the shaft. So I got to first put it on the shaft. How do we do that? We go down to our mates, which is this paper clip. I click on left click on the mate, and then I go up here and I click on this axis, and I click on this kind of consolidated axis, combined axis, and then I want to make it coincident. And now I have it where I want it. Okay, so now I want to make the spacer flush to this surface. So I want to push the spacer closer to the motor so it's flush to this surface. What I do is I do the same process. I'm going to tip this up a little bit, and I'm going to go in a little bit, and I'm going to take this surface and mate it with this surface. And then that means that the spacer will be riding against the moving part of the motor, which is what you want. So I'm going to go down here to let me get down here. I'm going to go to my paperclip, click mate, and then I'm going to pick up a geometry. I'm going to pick up this geometry, which happens to be a face. And notice the whole motor becomes transparent, so it doesn't get in the way if I want to get another geometry. Let me move this out of the way. And there's this face. So I have two faces, and it says what I can do with those two faces. It says I can lock those faces, which is not, because one of the faces is not a face, it's an edge. Do you see this is the face? This is an edge. I thought I got a face. So let me get rid of this edge. Okay. Now let me go back into here. And let me see if I can find a face. There's the face. See how the whole thing is now nicely lit up? So I'll do this. Notice it says a face, and it says I can make those two faces coincident. So let's push this button, and lo and behold, there it is. So now this is actually resting against the motor. Now I want to point out something I think that's interesting here. Let's close out this face. Notice the relationship. I'll zoom in a little bit. Okay, let me get rid of this. Notice that this collar, or this spacer, is a little bit smaller than the moving part of the robot, or the motor. So what happens right here, the moving part of the motor. So what happens is this spacer will not rub against the fixed part of the motor. So you have a nice smooth motion between the spacer and the motion of the shaft. So now I'm going to bring the wheel down onto the spacer. Let's push the wheel up against this spacer. Again, what I do is I bring up my mate. I make it closer by using my my wheel on my mouse, and I'm going to click on this region. This is a face. So I got a face here. Now I'm going to flip it up and go in again with my wheel. I got another face here. I would then do I'll click coincident, okay, and voila. What do we have? Let me back out by moving my um, my wheel away from me. Let me push my wheel down and rotate this, and this is what it looks like. And that actually looks pretty nice, okay, as far as the wheel's concerned. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the other one. So I'm not going to bore you with it. So I will do I will do that. I'll take a moment, and then I will come right back to the video. Okay, we've returned to the recording, and now I put the other spacer and the other wheel mated to it. So if we peek in here, and what I'm doing is I'm again uh, turning my wheel, my mouse wheel, towards me, and it looks like we have a nice symmetric design, and the wheels are now nicely snugged up against the motor. The one thing the wheels are not snugged up against is there's nothing that prevents this axle from falling out. So let me grab the axle and let me move the axle and see how the axle moves back and forth. It would be terrible if you had a robot and your axle fell out. Okay? Matter of fact, they have. We've seen them. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to use another device called a collar that will fix the axles onto here. So let's pick up a collar. So we go back over here. We're going to insert. I'm going to hit my left mouse button to bring it up. And we have all these results, but we know how to get through them pretty quickly now. And remember, I'm going to use my parts library. And let's see if we have anything in the C's here that would do it. And here's a collar. This is a shaft collar, and it's a skinny one or slim one. So I'll click on that, and I'll bring it here. And as before, we can't see the shaft collar. We see it here. When we highlight it, we see it, but we don't see it because it's inside the motor, which is kind of a silly place to put a shaft collar, but we'll move it out. Don't worry about it. So I'm going to left click the shaft collar, and then I get those arrows again. See those arrows? Let me bring them in. Okay. And so I'm going to grab the arrow that I'm interested in. As a matter of fact, let me bring it out a little bit so I can move that shaft collar way out. And I'm going to move it up like this. Okay. Now, before I forget, okay, I better make sure that I bring up my mates and get that shaft collar, axis of the shaft collar, to be the same as the axis of the, and there's the axis of the shaft collar, the same as the axis of the shaft. So I do this, and now that should be a mated shaft collar. So if I grab a hold of my shaft collar, I can move it up and down. But I can't move it left and right. Okay, now I want the shaft, where do I want the shaft collar to sit? I could sit it at the end of the shaft, way out here, but then that doesn't keep the motor pushed up against anything. So what I'd like to do is I would like to mechanically have the shaft collar rest against this face. Let me bring that face in. This face of the wheel. So it snugly, not tightly, not over tight, but just snugly does it. So let's see if we can do that. That's again, it's a coincident mate. So I'm here. I'm going to push this. That gives me my first face. Then I'm going to push my wheel down, and then I'm going to rotate this, and then push it out, bring it to me, and then select this face. Now, when I have those faces on, then I can do coincidence, and then I have it. So now I have the shaft collar holding holding that wheel on. Let me go through and not bore you putting the other shaft collar on. So just wait a moment, and I'll come back after I have the other shaft collar on. Well, welcome back, and notice we have the second collar on. So we have a collar, we have a wheel, and we have a spacer, we have a motor, and all that is connected with a shaft. It's showing through here. Now, the one last thing we need is we need to fix the collar on that shaft because the shaft can still move. You say, no, that shaft can't move. Well, let's try it. See the shaft moving? Now, the collar has a provision, has a mechanism. It's called a set screw. Let's see if I can find it. It's right here. It sets in this hole. And that set screw will screw in and it will press against this face of the shaft to keep the collar from moving on the shaft. So what we need to do is we do need to do something like a set screw to make sure that the shaft is not running, is not moving inside inside this collar. So how do we do that? We use a mate. So I'm going to go back into mates. Okay. And then I'm going to put a mate between the face of this collar and the face of the shaft. So it's those two faces. Now, if I used our coincident mate, what it would do, it would push the collar right out to the end of the shaft, so they would be flush to the end of the shaft. I don't want to do that, but I can use a mate that's this, which is a distance mate. So that will dictate, they'll fix the distance between the end of the shaft and the face of the collar, those two green things shown two green faces shown in the drawing. So let's do a distance, which is right here. See, it has the little marks for distance. I'll do distance. And it's doing a distance mate. And what it says is the distance mate right over here is 6.3754 millimeters. That's what it is now. And that's kind of silly to have something that looks like 6.3794, so I'm just going to call it 6. So 6 millimeters. So it's 6 millimeters, and I will apply that. And it didn't really move. Now what happens is I can grab that shaft and try to move it, and I can't. By the way, I can rotate the shaft. Do you see me rotating it? Let me get real close. Okay. See, I can rotate the shaft, but I do not. But I can't pull it up and down. So the shaft is in there. Now you may ask at this point, why is the shaft rotating but the wheel's not rotating? By the way, I can rotate the wheels too. Right? And notice the wheel's not hooked to the shaft. And the reason for that is that we just use the axis on all of these, the center axis on all of these devices as a way of constraining them. If we wanted the wheel to turn the shaft and the shaft to turn the wheel in this model, is that we would have to take a face of the shaft and make a mate to the corresponding face of the wheel. and then they would turn together. It's not necessary for this particular application, but it's a good thing to think about. So if we're done with this, let's move this around. I'm rotating it. Notice when I move my mouse cursor down here and then make it bigger, it pushes it up. When I put my mouse cursor over here and make it bigger, it's pushing it down. So we want to push it up, kind of center it. And guess what we see? We see our drawing. Now, there's an issue with the drawing because it has these funny axes on it, okay? And we could do some things to get rid of them if we wished, okay? And one thing we can do is we can click on that axis and we would bring I just left clicked on it and see the fly up we have. It says hide it. So let's hide that axis. Let's go through and hide this axis. Okay. Well, I'm not able to hide these other axes. So let's do this. And so I'm not going to hide the axis right now. Okay, so we'll have those things set because actually what I did is I destroyed the collar. Oh, if I destroyed the collar, if I took the collar off, what can I do? I can go down here and see what the undo does. Voila, the collar reappeared. See, the collar's back on. So I didn't do anything to destroy it. But we'll talk about later how you can go through and get rid of those axes if they bother you. So I think that is a completion of our first challenge. And I hope you learned from this. You're not good at it yet. And don't get discouraged because it's really hard to do. Just moving the mouse and positioning things and understanding how this works. But you'll have plenty of time to do it with the other challenges. And I think you should convince yourself that if you were to use this tool to build a robot, you'd have a really good understanding of what that robot is way before you start screwing pieces together and cutting pieces and actually physically putting a robot together. So this is the end of this video, and go out and make yourself challenge number 1. Bye.